What I'm going to do is to present some results of the projects which are devoted to their peer effects in education, which we do at our center. So basically, not just one paper, but several papers, and I try to cover some basics as well. Peer effects arise basically everywhere, and people around us affect our behavior in many different ways, in many different social situations. Just a few examples. If you are in the smoking environment, it increases your probability to start smoking as well. Lose weight, gain weight, also depend on your peers. If peers have large BMI, so they like big important people, you probably also start eating more. And if people are slim, you probably try to not to eat that much. And there are some research which demonstrates that people can assimilate their weight, not height, but weight, so BMI of the peers. Also, academic cheating might be subject to peer effects, because if you have like honest environment, it's really hard to start cheating there. But if there was just one cheating student, so it's a kind of disease which spreads over the class. Sports. If your friends are sporty and they're doing sports, you also think about starting doing something like running or powerlifting or something else. So people affect our behavior in many, many different ways and situations. And of course, in the education, both secondary education and higher education, it affects as well. So we all know that quite often students, if they are put in the strong group, they start doing better. And again, if students are not that lucky to be put in the strong environment, their achievements might deteriorate over time. They're not that strong at the end of the day. How it might work? It might work basically through very different channels. I'll just give examples of some of them. If you are in the strong group, you might learn something not only from the teacher, but also from peers. That helps you to do better in the strong group. You can also collaborate with your peers. That also helps. Strong group can learn more materials, because if the group is strong, the teacher starts presenting materials more fast, and he or she can cover more in the strong group. That's why it also allows for positive peer effect to appear. Competitive environment may be very important. If you see that your peers work hard, you can also start working more hard. Other way around, if you see that everybody compete, but you don't feel that you are so strong, you can decrease your effort because of the competition, not to increase it. Okay? So it might work different ways. Peers' habit may be also important. Imagine, for example, that you have a peer in your dorm. You are 4 in the dorm room, and you want to study every evening, but once you come in the room, your peers say, let's have a beer. And you think, okay, the beer first, reading later, and you do nothing at the end of the day. Okay? And also, if you come to the room and say, let's have a beer, and people are saying, no, we do our home exercise first, and we drink beer later, you probably start doing your exercises in the library as well. Social norms might be also important, because if everybody value effort, persistence, and honesty, you also think that you should behave in the same way. But if people are saying that good marks are only for like mommy children, you also think it's not very good to demonstrate that I do something for my studies. You'll probably hide your efforts to get good grades. So there might be different channels for that. How we define this effect in education? We say that peer effects are any externality in which outcome of the students, academic outcomes of the students, is affected either by peer exogenous background characteristics, attributes, then we call this kind of effects as exogenous peer effects. Example, you might be affected by gender of your peer or by ability of your peer, which may be measured by the initial entry score or in a different way. So those are exogenous characteristics which affect you. We call them exogenous peer effects. Or they might be endogenous peer effects, which are effects when your academic achievement or your academic characteristics is affected by peer outcomes. So those characteristics which are endogenous. Say, for example, efforts of your peers or current grades of your peers or some endogenous stuff. There is a quite extensive literature on the peer effects, and it started in the middle of 60s by the famous work by Coleman, which studied the impact of segregation in US schools. And one of the main findings which he got was that, of course, fundings of school is important for school to do better in terms of academic achievements of students, but what is also important is the social background. So the idea when you put, for example, old, low ability children in one class, in one school, and you put more financial effort to provide them with good environment in terms of facilities, teachers, etc., might not be that beneficial comparing to the case when you put those children in more stimulating environments with more strong people. So their argument against this kind of segregation, for example, racial segregation, was in these peer effects, that people should be with good peers, and good peers are important. Since the beginning of the 21st century, there is more increasing interest towards their peer effects model and peer effects questions. I think it's because of at least three factors. First, there is more and more general understanding that economic agents should be modeled and considered not as isolated agents, but in their interactions. So economists bring more and more social aspects in the modeling. Also, more microdata become available. So you can now get extensive microdata about every child in the sample. And also empirical methods are improving, so you can do better in terms of modeling complicated effects. Why empirical estimation is complicated for peer effects? First, as in many cases, some non-observable characteristics may exist. So this could be previous students' experience. This could be a lot of social factors which you can't measure, etc. But also what is important is that students' choice in terms of classes might be endogenous as well. Think think for example about US colleges. You come to the college and you can choose among a lot of classes, different classes, and it's really hard to predict how you choose classes. For example, you choose this because of your inner interests, but probably you do that because you know that this class would be also chosen by your friends, your potential peers. That's why there's a huge potential endogeneity in this kind of problems. How to cope with that? First, what many research do is to look on roommates in empirical studies. Why roommates? Because in many university environments, for the first year of study, you can't choose your roommate. You just take part in the lottery, and your assigned peer, you know the gender because normally there is no mixture in the gender, but you don't know the person and you can't influence who would be your roommate. That's why that avoids the problem of endogeneity. You just take your roommate for granted. And people use roommate for this research. Why is not the perfect way to measure peer effects? Because your roommate could choose different major. And say, for example, you study humanities, and your peer choice is mathematics. Then peer habits in terms of beer, textbook, might affect you. But those kind of peers, this particular roommate, can't help you with learning humanities. You can't do anything together, right? So in this case, roommates are not perfect peers, okay? That's why what we can also do is look at the rigid educational programs when you can't choose your peers, when peers are also heterogeneous just because you are assigned to a special group and you can't make a choice between subjects. And basically, there are one normal option when it happens. It happens in the military school. When you go to the military school, you can say, okay, I want to choose athletics, I don't want to choose strategy, military thinking, I want to be kind of humanitarian type of military person, I'm going to choose this kind of subject. No, you are assigned to a special program, you have a special sequence of courses, and you have your roommates, and normally you have like 20 roommates in your dorm, which is nice. You can choose different kind of peers, but there is no endogeneity. And of course, that's a good way to study peer effects. A lot of literature is exactly focused on roommate studies. For example, one of the first empirical studies on that type by Sacerdote on one US college demonstrates that average grades in a sample of students were higher for those students whose roommate were in the top of the class. So he demonstrates that people benefit from smart roommates. So there are positive peer effects. Zimmerman also, on the basis of some US college, demonstrates that students in the middle of SAT score, which is their initial test score they came into university, got worse grades if their roommates are weak. So if you're in the top, that's what Zimmerman said, if you're in the top, bad students don't affect you. But if you're some in between low and high ability type, you're in trouble because of their low ability roommates. And those two papers by Brunella and colleagues and by Jain and Kapoor, they study exactly this kind of rigid educational programs, and they demonstrate there are positive peer effects and there is no negative peer effects. Some papers are based on the military academy data. For example, Lyle, 2009, here worked with the data of West Point, which is very elite US military institutions. So students are very able, students are very good. And he demonstrates there is a positive effect from high type students, and there is no significant peer effects from low ability students. Also, another paper is based on US Air Force Academy, which is also kind of elite US institutions. And he demonstrates that students with low initial scores in SAT verbal part, they benefit from good academic environment. But what is restrictive in those kind of studies is that military studies is something peculiar both in types of people who enroll in the military institutions and also in the type of studies which happens there. So you can't easily extrapolate what you get for the military institutions for the whole bunch of studies. You need to do something with like more usual subject like econ, mathematics, etc. And for example, this paper by De Paolo e Scopa on one Italian university does basically that. So what models are used for empirical estimations? That's a pretty standard empirical model when we try to explain the academic outcome of students by some number of characteristics. What do we mean by academic outcome of students? That's normally either grade in some particular subject during the year, for example, or GPA after the first year, second year of studies, etc. So that might be different measures of academic outcome. And this academic outcome is explained by some individual characteristics of students, like gender, social status, initial ability, etc. And also some vector, some number of exogenous characteristics of the students, of the peers, like again, gender of the peers, initial ability of the peers, social status, many other potential characteristics, and also by their outcome of the peers. For example, the effort of the peer, the number of hours they provide they spend in the classroom. So, which means that academic outcome is a function both of current outcome of peers and also of exogenous characteristics of peers and these particular students as well. So the coefficient here, the coefficient at their achievement of peers is called endogenous effects. That's what's called endogenous effect because those are endogenous characteristics. And this effect is called exogenous because those are the vector of exogenous characteristics of peers. What we face here is the endogeneity problem. It comes from the fact that endogenous effect here, here we have current outcome of peers, and those current outcome from peers influence the outcome of the particular students, but these particular students also affect the outcome of peers at the same time. And what we get at the end of the day are what is called reflection problem. That's the term suggested by Mansky in his paper when he delineates this kind of fact. It's saying that not only achievement of peers influence students' achievement, but also students' achievement influence achievement of peers. And just a simple solution for that is just to estimate this equation in the reduced form, concentrating only on exogenous effect. Russian case. Here, in our research, we benefit hugely from Russian type of data because it's like military academy in some way. Why is that? Because don't think about Russia for a moment. Imagine just simple situation. You are enrolled in the educational program. You don't know exactly what subjects you are going to study, because you know that there is some sequence of subjects you are going to pass. If you fail 2 subjects in a row or 3, you get expelled immediately without any opportunity to retake the exam more than once. You are also assigned your desk in the class normally and your peers. And if you want to leave the class, you need to raise your hand and say, may I leave for 5 minutes to the bathroom? So can you imagine that? It's not military academy. That's more or less normal, typical usual Russian university. Okay? That's why data on Russian higher educational system are very good, because people here don't study military subjects. Of course, they did in Soviet times, but not now. But again, all necessary characteristics to allow not to face endogeneity problem are here. So groups are formed from above. You can't choose your peer. And majority of courses are compulsory. You can't skip the course, and you can't take extra course during first to 3 years of your study. That's why we try to benefit the situation and use this data to answer our research. Yes?
I'm just curious, how reliable is the performance data?
I'll come back to that in a few moments, in a few slides, okay? So what we try to do, we try to benefit from Russian style of higher education system organization to answer a very simple research question. Do peers matter in exogenously formed groups? Here, our peers are not roommates, are not friends. They are those people who are assigned with you in the same group. Okay? That's our research question. Admission to the university is organized in the following way. There is admission to tuition-free positions in any university, including HEC, either through Olympiads, that's national-wide competitions for talented students. If you do well at these Olympiads and you got a winner diploma, you can choose any university in the country to be admitted without any payment. So if you're really smart, you don't need to sit any exams. And for others, there is what is called unified state examination. That's an exam in several subjects, which is seen by all high school graduates, and is used both as a graduation exam from the high school and also as an entry information for the university. Okay? And that's a standardized test, which means that all people sit this exam in the same time in the country. So there is no informational arbitrage, etc. And basically, exams sets are the same across regions, schools, and everything. And also, there are two obligatory subjects, which is mathematics and national language, which is Russian. And you can choose different subjects according to your future major. If you want to apply for mathematical program, if you need, for example, physics. If you want to apply for humanities, you need English or history, etc. Okay? So that's how it works. What is important here is that on the average, less than 5% of students enter university in the country through Olympiad system. Less than 5%. That's really top selective mechanism to use. But in case of HEC, there is about 40% of Olympiad winners who came to HEC through Olympiads. That's just because HEC very strong institution, and many people want to be here, so they use their Olympiad certificates to enter. That's why in some other universities we might skip this Olympiad mechanism, but here we should really take that into account. Okay? And those students who are not that strong as those students, but also quite high in terms of unified test, they also enter university but pay tuition fee. How the process is organized? Undergraduate program lasts 4 years. During the first 3 years, most of the courses are compulsory. It's not like that anymore in, for example, recent years, but we use data for previous year, where it was the case. And those study groups are allocated by administration and have about 30 students in each group. So there is a real intense educational environment into each group. And lectures are delivered for the whole year cohort simultaneously for, there might be 100, 200 people in the class. And seminars are delivered for each group individually. And for each seminar class, there is basically the same group for same subject, all subjects. So for our empirical research, we use the data for 250 students, which were enrolled in HEC Econ program in 2009. What is important about 2009 is that it was the very first year where the system of admission was used. Before that, there were special entry exams, but in 2009, everybody demonstrated a certificate with UEC scores. And in the beginning of the academic year, students were allocated into 11 study groups. And as a peers, we consider this study group about 25, 30, 35 people. And abilities of students are measured both by the fact whether the student was Olympiad winner and he came or she came to HEC through Olympiad mechanism, and by UEC scores in Russian language and mathematics. You might ask about those Olympiad winners. If they're Olympiad winners, they probably don't have any exam certificate, but it's not the case because since this exam is also for high school graduation, everybody sees that. Even if you get your winner Olympiad certificate, you still need to pass this exam and you still need to have the certificate. By the way, in the previous years, if you get this kind of certificate, Olympic winner certificate, you can go to your chosen university no matter what, but in this year, this is also a threshold. You can use your Olympic certificate only if your test score is more than 75%, okay? Which means that you should also be able to demonstrate that you have your high ability at the regular exam, okay? So we have data for test scores, initial test scores, even for those people who came through Olympiad system. What is our empirical strategy? First, we predict the students' weighted grade point average in the first year using the personal characteristics of students. Then, using this prediction, we divide the entire sample of students into 3 subgroups. We call top students who have the highest predicted GPA, the highest top third group. Bottom students are those students who have predicted GPA in the bottom 1/3 of the distribution. And those who are in the middle, we call them middle group students. What we also do, we calculate the share of peers in their study group, in each study group, who have relatively high or relatively low UT scores in mathematics, okay? That's why it allows us to estimate peer effects in 2 different models. The first model is to estimate peer effects through the impact of the average peer ability, okay? And the second model is estimating the peer effects through the share of strong or weak students in your environment, okay? That's 2 different models we are going to estimate. So we're saying that the scores are low if they're in the bottom 25% and high if they're in the 25%. So imagine, for example, that you are in the group when everybody is in the top 25% of their distribution in mathematics, test scores, initial test scores in mathematics, which means that you're in the very strong group, okay? That's descriptive statistics. And what we have for prediction of the first year weighted grade point average, we see that extra score in mathematics and the native language gives some extra to your ranking. Maximum ranking is 600, okay? And the fact that you are winner of, that's the most important one, all Russian Olympiad, give you 91 point to your expected ranking, which is a huge impact. And if you are not the winner of all Russian Olympiad, but you are winner of like smaller Olympiad, which is interregional Olympiads, then you also have a huge increase in ranking as well. What we do now, we estimate our peer effects through these two models. One is through peer group mean score in mathematics, and another one is through share of peers with low UC scores and high UC scores in mathematics. And what we can see here is that we do estimation both for the whole group and also for each segment of students. And what we basically see here is, for example, look on the microeconomics. In microeconomics, we see that peer group mean UC score affects the group in general. So if you have stronger peers in terms of average peer ability, on average, all students do better. But also we have an impact for top group of students. And we don't have any significant income for middle students or bottom students, which means, for example, if you are in the strong group and you are the strong person as well, you benefit from this fact. But if you are weak students and you are placed in the strong group, there is no such an effect. But there is an effect in general. And this nonlinear effect holds for not only for micro, but also for macro and economics of the firm courses, for several courses. Look now for the second specification of the model, when we estimate the share of peers with high and low UC scores in mathematics. And you see that there's basically no negative impact of the presence of the low ability students in the group, neither on students on average or for any particular group of students. But again, if you measure peer effects not through their average grades, but through share of peers with high scores in mathematics, you can see here there is, again, for all three subjects, positive influence of presence of such people in the group. Okay? Then we estimate the same for math courses, for calculus, differential equations, and linear algebra. And we see here, we don't see any substantial effect for differential equations and linear algebra, and only for calculus. Significant effect, and there might be different explanation why is that. We can touch that a bit later. Again, through this second specification, there is no negative peer effects, but there is positive peer effects, again, for top group of students for some subjects. And if we estimate the peer effects at the end of the first year for GPA in general, we see here that there is both influence for the whole group from the peer group means and also for the top group as well. So it holds not only for some particular subjects, but for their academic outcome in general. Yeah.
Could you just go back to the calculus differential equation?
This one?
Yeah. So here,
is it also a possibility because of the nature of the subjects that this is not showing up? I mean, calculus, you know, you can learn from your peers, but linear algebra, I would say, is more theoretical. And, you know, because of the very nature of the subject, there's not much learning from the peers to be had.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Of course, the potential explanation probably lies in the types and the nature of the subject. I don't see much difference between calculus and linear algebra, say. That's both theoretical subjects and they require individual learning. And there is no like group assignments. Let's meet together and make a nice presentation about, say, continuous functions. So everyone can benefit a lot. I can draw slides nicely. So I also get a high grade for just for that, right? So that's the individual learning for all three subjects. But you are right in the sense that peer groups are more significant. They are higher for econ subjects than for math subjects, because definitely probably math subjects require more individual effort and individual learning. And at the end of the day, you sit the exam with your own problem set only. And in econ subjects, there are some weight assigned in the mark to some peer group assignments. That's my big explanation. In the sense, you're right. But
individual learning and the way in which the teacher, the instructor, does his job. It means do you have any way to control for the effect of the
teacher effect?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question. Of course, that's one of the standards things that you can do is to measure teacher effects. Unfortunately, we don't have enough data to do that in this particular paper, but thinking about that for the future. And of course, anecdotal evidence suggests that there is some potential impact in that. What anecdotal evidence suggests that quite often those students who are taught in the classes by the teacher who also gives lectures are doing better than those students who are assigned with those teachers who don't teach this class. Okay, but you're right. There are many things to look at that in this regard. So our findings, how we can summarize them, are first, we see that individual grades in many disciplines during the first year improve with the growth of classmate abilities, measured either by the average growth of the ability or the rise of the share of high ability students in the group. What we also find that peer effects are of nonlinear nature, which is that high ability students benefit from the greater share of high able students in the group. But for most subjects, it doesn't hold for low ability or middle ability students. What we also find is that an increase in the share of less ability students don't influence much the classmates' achievements, which is important for educational policy because quite often there are concerns is that if you put some weak students into a class, you can get bad influence for the whole group. Like one person can spoil the whole atmosphere. It's not the case here. So what we basically find is that there is some impact of top students on top students, but there is not much impact through other groups. What might be the possible explanation for that? The possible explanation might work as follows. Imagine then those peers who are connected with some social ties between each other influence each other more than those who don't have such a personal ties. And that particular should be probably true if you are friends with a person, this person affects you more in all regards. If you like spend the whole day with a person at the same desk, this person also affects you more. If some person just doesn't show up in class, she or he doesn't affect you more than the person you're always with. So we might expect that people who are connected to each other influence each other more. What we also know from many previous studies, and also what anecdotal evidence suggests, is that there is a homophily in the relationship, which means that people who are close in some attributes also are connected. So students of similar ability probably form social ties more often than students from different types of social abilities. If we assume those assumptions, then they should be positive spillovers from high ability students on high ability students, just because there is those social connections. So to test that, the validity of that assumptions, we need further research, and that's what we also did in one of our papers. But coming back to our initial research question, which was, does peer effect exist in the exogenously formed study groups? The answer is yes, it exists, and it's of nonlinear nature. And one of the possible explanations for this existence is, one of the possible further directions is to try to really understand, is this peer group, like study group, the most important peer group? And the answer, like hypothesis, is no. There should be some subgroup into this big study group, which is probably more important for your academic outcome than the whole study group. And our hypothesis for the further research was that social ties are important in peer group formation. And social ties work as a transmission mechanism for peer effects. That's what our next paper was about. So if you ask me about that during the coffee breaks or any time, we'll be happy to talk about those results further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I kindly ask you to wait till we will come with you with microphone and not start asking your question before you got a microphone. Thank you. So, Christian, you have a question or comment?
Just a curiosity, looking at your results, it looks like maybe there's the type of peer effect that is kicking in is competition, like the top guys are competing more among themselves, so this makes them perform better. So am I right? And if so, do you have a way of testing that? And the other question I have is that the division that you did into 3 groups makes a lot of sense. You have to start somewhere. But of course, that's arbitrary. So I don't know if there's some kind of way that you could refine the analysis, having more groups or playing a little bit with, how many guys you have, maybe instead of looking at the top guys as the first 30%, might be interesting to see how the effect varies depending if you get different, if you focus on the first 5% or the first 40%.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. Regarding the first part, whether the competition is important, it seems that yes, because in HEC, there's a system of open information for all marks and all rankings. So what you can do, you can access information for your grades and also for grades of your peers, and not only grades, but this cumulative ranking. So you should learn your position and position of your competitors. And a colleague of mine did a study which demonstrates that exactly this ranking works as a different competition mechanism for different group of students. For strong students, it works in the positive way. They compete more for high places. And for weak students, it works as a say, discouraging device, because if you know that you are in the second place at the bottom, why bother to be fifth from the bottom? You don't care, and that exactly works. For the second part of the question, for kind of robustness checks, why we divided that into these three particular groups, that's because a couple of previous papers did basically the same. That's why we follow this standard technique, but we tried different composition of groups, and the results are more or less stable and the same. There is nothing fancy extra in different composition.
Quite relate to the USE data of yours. As I see, it's unified data, right? And I assume that this is ignoring inequalities between students and schools. Usually students have different backgrounds, and for example, the quality of education in very center of Moscow and the suburban of Moscow is obviously different, and there is discrepancy between schools. And how does it affect, in your opinion, to your research? Like, it's just saying that you have different background, and I just want to ask you this standard questions, and it's highly probable that the one person from high level in school or college, whatever, they may do good results, the other is doing very bad or poor. And yeah, this is the question. Thank you.
I think that you're right, saying that inequality issues are important here, but they're not that critical as they might be in, say, average institution, because HEC again is very selective university, and even students from different regions, they come from rather strong schools with quite good social environment, etc. So there is always a selection bias in this kind of data. And what we also did in the previous research, we tried to estimate, without any peer effects, we tried to estimate the impact of initial test scores on their GPA during first several years, and it turns out that there is a huge impact, and UC state examination results predict a huge part of the variation in the mark. And what again we got is that mathematics is an important subject, and national language is not that important. So to predict how good you are in the studies, we should look on your math grades, not anything else. Mm-hmm.
Is there still time for a question? Yes, okay, so I have a question about, in the literature, you see often these top to bottom peer effects. And in Russia, you find only top to top peer effects, essentially, or mainly, you could say. And I was wondering why that's the case. One observation we could make is that the institutional environment is very competitive. It's about ranking, the rankings and the results are visible for everybody, so they're all trying to be the highest on the ranking, and then you create incentives not to help the bottom ones, because if you help the bottom ones, it's never going to improve your ranking, definitely. So I wonder to what extent the incentives create this kind of top to top. It's not good or bad, it's just an observation. And then in a longer view, I also wonder whether we know the long run results of the students. Because I've seen a few papers that say that, okay, if you have a lot of top to bottom effects, these are the people that do very well in the long run. Because in the long run, if you make a career in a firm, it's not about your performance. You are promoted if your team does well. And your team does well if you help the worst guys in your team and you make them better. So it's the people that do good and top to bottom peer effects. They are the ones that actually the really good ones later on. And I wonder whether we could study this in this context. Do we have LinkedIn or do we have data of later careers? Because my expectation would be that those guys that create some top to bottom effects, they're the ones that ultimately do best, actually.
Mm-hmm. I think first, I think the results which we got are at least partially driven by two factors. First is the severe competition between students, which you mentioned, and also by the fact of high selectivity of students, because what we call bottom students are really smart, competitive, good students who are just at the bottom of the very top of the overall distribution of Russian students. And those 40% of initial Olympiads intakes, it just demonstrates that. If you go for more heterogeneous environment, you would probably get totally different results. And I think our results are driven mostly by those two factors. And of course, anecdotal evidence suggests that there are a lot of competition. And again, there is papers by Vaquero, for example, on rich club phenomena, that strong students stay together and don't accept weaker students, don't help them. So there is a lot of different evidence. Both fortunately and unfortunately, HEC administration recently introduced, I would say, the motto of importance of soft skills in the education and project skills, and we have more like project assignments during their course curricula. That's mostly beneficial for students, but also not that beneficial for our research because we don't have that clear individual data as we had before. And for performance data, you had a question about how reliable performance data are.
Well, I didn't know that it was just on one institution. I was thinking
Yeah, exactly. And we got an access to administrative database, so it's not just self-reported marks, but just the data from their administrative database.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I don't know, maybe in High School of Economics you have more homogeneous groups. I mean that the distance between top and bottom is not as much as, for example, when you go to province university, the distance between top students and bottom students might be very high. And in that way, maybe bottom can affect, like spoil the top students. I don't know case of High School of Economics, but maybe your standard of students you accept, not much variance within the group between top and bottom.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true, and that both drives the results partially and doesn't allow us to look at some variation in important characteristics. For example, the problem is that even poor people in the group are quite rich, in the sense that what we expected is that their region the person came from should be important, and also whether the person was from their complete family with mother and father, both mother and father, and with high income or low income. But the problem is that typical household is that both parents, both with higher education, with quite a good income, and there is no much variation in these variables.
Thank you very much for this research. It was very interesting for me, and I want to know what you supposed to suggest, how to make a perfect group and a perfect structure of group. How many good students and low students may be in the group? Maybe one good student by two weak students, and there's one question and another question. How you change in High School of Economics groups? Are they changing students from year to year? Or maybe the group is one for 4 years the same? What is perfect in your point of view?
Thank you very much for the question, especially for the first question, because it's my favorite one. And every time I present this paper, I'm looking forward to this particular question: what is the best policy, how to form groups? And the answer is tricky. The answer is that, what do you want to get from that as a university? Do you want the best students to be the best as possible? Or you want the lower students from the bottom to be the best as possible? Or you maximize the average? Or you minimize their dispersion? That's the question you should answer me first before I give you my answer. And normally when I get the answer like that from the university administration, and I give my question back, the answer is that we don't know. We basically want everything. And I say, if your answer is you don't know, my answer will be you better do nothing with the policies until you know what you want to get. And I think it's really important to highlight that in many cases, university is that complicated, has such a complicated utility function that it's really hard to suggest some policy measures just because we don't know what do we want to maximize. Okay? So that's why we should be very careful about suggesting something practical from this research.
I think my question is not related to your peer effect, but how do you consider about teachers and professors? I'm sure that the because each semester in HSE, at the end of every semester, we students have to evaluate the best teacher and professors. So I'm sure that it depends. I'm sure that the result of the group depends on the teachers and the professors. If professor are if the professor is encouraging a lot to the student to study, I'm sure that the academic result of the group should be better. So
thank you for the question. For HEC, traditionally the issue of measuring their students' satisfaction was always important, but until recently, every year we had a student survey where students evaluate teachers, but until recently their return rate was quite low. It was like 30–40%. So you really can't use those data which such a severe bias. But in the last year, we introduced new electronically brand new system, and it works perfectly in the sense that now more than 90% of students evaluate teachers. So in a couple of years, we're going to have quite good data on student satisfactions, and probably we can try to use that. But you should be also very careful about using this type of data, because we don't really know what is exactly measured when students evaluate teacher positively. Is it because he or she got good grades or learned something? We never know for sure.
I remember 2 years and 3 years. It was quite complicated and a very long questionnaire. So I think there should be a program of a questionnaire itself. So.
Thank you very much. So I would like to say that peer effects start working because I have the same comment as my roommate Dmitry about the homogeneity. Maybe when you speak about selective university, students of selective universities are more homogeneous in their abilities, and you should take this into the consideration. But I have two comments. Firstly, you have a statement that the share of weak students doesn't spoil the whole...
on the margin.
Okay. But don't you think that by this you a little bit underestimate the role of teacher and the mechanism of enforcement? Because if you have strong mechanism of enforcement, like here, you said that don't use notebooks, and we don't use notebooks. But maybe if there will be another group, there will be 5 or 6 people with notebooks, and you'll have low enforcement power. Maybe so we wouldn't listen to your lecture. It's the one.
First lesson.
Okay.
First lesson to learn for institutional economists is that don't mix rule and enforcement. Not to use computers or laptops or mobile phones is a rule. You haven't seen our enforcement mechanism yet. And I wish you not to meet that very that's
But I mean that in selective universities there
right. But for the first part of the comment, of course, students are very homogeneous in terms of very standard characteristics like social status, abilities, and everything. But the social interactions normally works as follows. When you have very homogeneous group, people anyway start to search for some characteristics which are heterogeneous in the group. If you are the same in terms of income, you start looking on some other characteristics like ability. If you are the same in terms of ability, you are still looking something to be unique in the group. But it's not like very standards like ability or income, but it might be like fancy job or good car or I don't know what else, nice haircut. People always start to differentiate themselves from the group, which means that even in the sample as HEC, you should look for this kind of characteristics which are heterogeneous in the group.
When we study labor markets, we look at job satisfaction, together with salaries or wages. And when we look at academic achievement as an outcome, do you control for some satisfaction with education? Because it can peer effects. Maybe you have a good roommate, and you will have good mood, and you will get better grades and so on, or you may get depression, or there might be a situation when you are a good student, but you come to selective universities, everyone are very clever, and you feel so your attitudes toward yourself are getting lower, you have a kind of depression, and you can get negative peer effects. And maybe you can it's important to control for some psychological indicators, or if you have it in data.
Personally, I don't believe in psychological indicators in this type of environment, in this type of research, because I know a lot of people who were on the top of ranking, like in the first 5, and were always totally unhappy and depressed not to be in the first row. And I know a lot of people who were in the bottom and were just happy because they were like anyone else. So, and I think what matters at the end of the day is their labor market outcomes, because you could be good students, you could be in the first of your group, you could be good friend to everybody, but you can be unlucky or inefficient in the labor market. That's why what we have in plans is just to look at the same group of students and to see labor market outcomes and to see how they were affected by their social ties and their academic achievements during the studies. That's what really matters, I think.
Thank you, Maria. I know that we're running out of time, so I'll focus on my question is related to a previous one on the policy implications of your results, and perhaps in particular, if an administrator wanted to minimize dropout rates or improve the student performance in the bottom quarter, because for social mobility reasons we see this as an important mission of universities, and in many countries there's financial implications for minimizing dropout rates. From your results it seems that, well perhaps you can explain what recommendations from your results you would have for either separating out high achieving students from the rest, or better integrating them for the goals of improving the performance in the bottom quarter.
Thank you very much for this question. We don't answer this particular question in this paper, but we have another paper exactly on dropouts. And what we try to look at is that how dropouts affect the social ties of those people who survived. Because, for example, imagine that your best friend, like I'm your best friend, and I was dropped out of the university, and you spent most of your time with me, and all your social networks was through my connections. Then if I'm dropped out, then you are in trouble, because initially my social ties also contributed to your academic success, and now you lose it. So I think the story is more complicated, because social ties play a huge role both for good students, but also for weaker students who are under risk, because if you're because your academic achievements is a function of your individual ability and also your social ties who keep you into the process. And if your ability is low, then social ties might be more important. So what our next research suggests that if you are in trouble and you're about to drop out, you shouldn't be given the retake during the normal course of the study, because if you are preparing for retake, you can't be a part of your normal social life, and you better take the course a second time and not to miss your class, but that will be more efficient than try to catch up in the same time. That's what it suggests.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, it was really great teaser to talk with Maria at coffee break
Sorry,
and
just
lunch.
just for Victor, that was an example of enforcement. How is it? Okay.